Okay, we're starting Mitzvah Shem Siman Daled in Maamar Shevuos, and basically we brought so far that the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda was that it's usher to go to Eretz Yisrael Bizman Hazeh, and we wanted to know how that fits in with the Mishnah that says that the husband and wife could force each other. So basically the teretz is going to be that the Mishnah was Bizman Shebeis Mikdash Kayam, and Rabbi Yehuda is Bizman Hazeh. That's basically the answer. And to prove that, to kind of like show that that's really a distinction, the Rebbe brought the Ram in Rottenburg, who says that the Mishnah was only Bizman Abayis, but Bizman Hazeh, only husbands could force wives and not vice versa. So, it's still not Rabbi Yehuda's Shita, but it shows that the Mishnah changed nowadays. But what's left to explain here is that why did it change if the Ram in Rottenburg holds that the wife could not force the husband could force the wife? What kind of a mitzvah is it nowadays that it's less, but it's still there? Like, if it's still there, it's there. If it's not there, it's not there. So we had an explanation with the Bach, but now we're going to say something else. He says, another answer that we could say on this, he says, the Hinei Bedrisha Sivkot and Gimel. Bedrisha is a Pirush on the Tur, and he says, Marich, he goes on for a long time, Lafarish, Deloy Savar Haram, Kashitis Rabbeinu Chaim, Sha'achshav Ein Mitzvah Klal, V'Adar B'Eretz Yisrael. He says the Ram, the Rabbi Rottenburg, who holds that a wife can't force a husband, he's not saying that he holds like Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen, that there's no mitzvah at all, because then husband couldn't force the wife either, right? El the Savar She'ena Mitzvah Gedoyla Kol Kach, K'moy Bizman Abayis. He holds that the mitzvah is not as great as it was in the old days. And this goes back to the Igros Moshe that I was showing you before, that he says that the mitzvah is like an optional mitzvah. So that's sort of what he's saying too, except the Rebbe is going to say a different mahalach. The wife can't force the husband, but there is such a small mitzvah that the husband can force the wife. This is clear, it's true that this has to be true, that Rabbeinu Chaim Cohen is not the same shita as the Ram in Rottenburg. Because you see the Marit, he's also cholak on Rabbeinu Chaim, but Hevi Raya me Maram, he brings the Raya from the Maram, shekasav shadayin yesh koach al koponim beish l'chfoisa, that he says even Bizman Hazeh, the husband could force the wife. So you see clear that even Bizman Hazeh, there's a mitzvah, according to the Ram in Rottenburg. The Rush, Hevi Divrei Aram, the Rush also brings down the Ram. He doesn't bring down the Rabbeinu Chaim at all. So you see, one doesn't depend on the other. The Igros Moshe used it as a tool to bring out that the mitzvah is less, Bizman Hazeh, but basically it's not dependent on it. And also, most poskim take on that the Rabbeinu Chaim holds there's no mitzvah at all, Bizman Hazeh. The Igros Moshe is really the only one that I saw that really learns that the Rabbeinu Chaim holds there is a mitzvah, but he basically says that it's optional, so you don't have to do it when there's a difficulty. But basically everyone else assumes that Rabbeinu Chaim holds there's no mitzvah at all. So he's saying basically the Ram holds there is a mitzvah, right? But it's not as big. Or the other poskim were cholak on Rabbeinu Chaim, they don't disagree with the Ram. Okay, but the problem is the understanding of what this means, a big mitzvah and a small mitzvah. He says, you have to get to the root of the matter here. What happened here? What's the big and what's the small? The if even today there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael, Shemanoi HaRamban, that the Ramban counted, then it's a mitzvah gedola today also. If that mitzvah doesn't apply today, then mahia mitzvah ktana. What's the small mitzvah? Before we read what the Rebbe answers on this, let's just look in this week's Maamar Kohemis here, in page 7, reading the Shalosh Tshuvas HaRashbash, basically says very similar to what Rav Moshe says. He says that there's a mitzvah of Yishuv Eretz Yisrael Bizman Hazeh, take a look. Very hard to read, but it's in the small letters here. It's very bad print. He says, "Ein safik shehadira be'eretz Yisrael hi mitzvah gedola b'chol zman bein bizman habayis bein shaloi bizman habayis." The mitzvah of Eretz Yisrael is a mitzvah all the time, even bizman hazeh. The Avi Zikni HaRamban Zal, the Ramban, my great-great-great-grandfather, he was a sixth generation from the Ramban, the Rashbash. The Rashbash is Rabbi Shlomo ben Shimon, the son of the Tashbats. He lived in Algeria, and he was a Rishon. So, sixth generation from the Ramban. He says the Ramban, Mana Oisa Miklal Mitzvah Saseh. He counted as a Mitzvah Saseh. K'moy shenemar v'yirishtem Oisa v'yishavtem ba. V'chein hi das Avi Adoini HaRashbat Zal. My father, the Rashbat, the Tashbats, B'Sefer Zoya HaRakia, in his Sefer HaMitzvahs, that he counts all the mitzvahs, Shechibra, which he composed. V'af L'divrei Haram Zal. Even according to the Rambam, he means, Shaloi Menah Miklal Mitzvah Saseh. The Rambam does not count Yishuv Eretz Yisrael as a mitzvah. Mikol Mokom Im Eina Mitzvah Nimnes, even though it's not a countable mitzvah, he mitzvah midrabanan. It's still a derabanan mitzvah. V'zeh mizulas milas acheres. There's other milas that are shaykh to Eretz Yisrael. Next words are hard to read, and he says, "Omnam mitzvah zu eina mitzvah koleles l'chol Yisrael begolos hachel hazeh." He says this mitzvah doesn't apply to all Yidden in this golos. Aval hi nimnas. He says, "Fakir, it's aser to be a mitzvah klalis, a mitzvah for everybody." It's very important to point out, because a lot of people say the Ramban holds it's a mitzvah bizman hazeh. It's a mitzvah bizman hazeh, but it's not a mitzvah klalis. Right? He says, "Kamasha amru zal b'gemor ksubas perko achroin shehi miklal Shevuos shehi shbiya HaKadosh Baruch Hu es Yisrael." It's one of the Shevuos. Lo yimaru es hakates, not to hurry the end. V'shelo yalu b'chayma, not to go up as a wall. But say re'eh b'nei Ephraim mashakar lahem shemiru es hakates. Go look what happened to the Bnei Ephraim who went out of Mitzrayim early, and they pushed for the end too early. Amna mitzvah hi al kol yachid la lois ladr sham. It's a mitzvah on every yachid to go up and live there. El shemitzvah zu im yesh drachim moinim oisai. If there are reasons not to go, then mechuyev, the ena mechuyev la lois. He's not mechuyev to go up. Shaharei af adarim sham yicholim lehem latzei lisa isha. We see the halacha is, the Rambam brings in Parakeh Malachim, he says, even if someone lives in Eretz Yisrael, he's allowed to leave in order to get married. For Lilmud Torah, in order to learn Torah. K'moy she'izkiru Chazal, or k'moy she'biarti, ba'arucha, b'kuntris. So he says basically, the mitzvah is optional, and it's a mitzvah, it's a good thing to do, but if there are reasons, you don't do it. And the Pasha Shulchan, next page in the Maamar Kohenis, brings it down. La halacha. He says here, "V'yesh oimrim the mitzvah yishuv Eretz Yisrael min ha'Torah gam bizman hazeh." There is a shita that holds that it's a mitzvah even bizman hazeh. Shneimar v'yirishtem oisa v'yishavtem ba v'shamarta lasois yeshivas Eretz Yisrael shkula k'chol ha'Torah. It's weighs the same as the whole Torah. Haramban b'sefer mitzvahs shaloi, and he says also the Rashbats and the Rashbash. Amnam eina mitzvah klalius l'chol Yisrael begalas achel hazeh. And he goes on to quote the whole Rashbash that we just read. We're not going to read it over again, but he quotes the Rashbash. He says the things that stop him from going, he says now he says some interesting examples that the Rashbash didn't say. He says kagoin sakanas hamidbariyos, like the sakana of travel in the desert, v'hayamim yamim in the oceans, hamisukanim. Or you have parnasa outside Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael you're not going to find. Or maybe he won't have enough money to go up. He's going to have to ask people for help. So for that the Torah wasn't mechayev him. There's no chiyuv to go ask for tzedakah to go there to Yisrael. It's like by some mitzvahs there is, right? By Chanukah, if you don't have an Ner Chanukah, you have to go and beg. You don't have Yain L'Kiddush, you have to go beg. But for this, you don't have to. Okay? So all these organizations that pay for people to go up, you don't have to take from others to go up. Vayoel Eretz Yisrael. Okay, so that is something else. But then he says in the side, in his Pirush in his Makoros, he says that why does he say this whole thing? Why does the Rashbash say this? Because the Taretz Masha Kasav B'Ksubas Kuf Yidal Hamad Aleph Shlo Yalu B'Choyma V'im Haya Mitzvah Al Kol Yisrael Im Ken Haya Chiyav Shayalu Kulam. If it would be a mitzvah on all of Yidden to go up, then it would be, then everyone would have to go up, and it would be against the Shevuos Shlo Yalu B'Choyma. He says that it's only neged to someone who doesn't have another reason to stay in Chutz La'aretz. Okay, so basically this is the Shalosh Shevuos codified. This is everyone asks, it's not halacha, it's not brought down. It is brought down. It's brought down by the poskim, and it's the Pas HaShulchan who's adding on to Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch is only things that are neged b'zman hazeh. So the Pas HaShulchan, when he's a Talmud of the Gra, who went up to Eretz Yisrael in early 1800s, and he came with his family, and by the way, his family died in the plague. He really suffered from Aliyah Eretz Yisrael. So the sakanas that he's talking about is really a real thing to him. There was starvation, there was malaria, and he went up and he wrote. That's why it's called Pas HaShulchan. It's the edge of the Shulchan Aruch. It's the parts of the Shulchan Aruch that the Shulchan Aruch left out, because they weren't Negeah, but now that he's going to Eretz Yisrael, he wanted to write it down and make a sefer out of it. Okay.
What was the name of who wrote the Pas HaShulchan?
Rabbi Yisrael Mishklov.
A direct Talmud of the Gra who moved to Eretz Yisrael?
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. Okay. So now, that was a little detour, but now we're going back to this. We're in the second paragraph. So basically, he's going to say a different mahalach, the Rebbe. He's going to say that the pshat in this chiluk between Bizman Hazeh and Bizman Habayis is basically because of who's in power. Because there's a member in the Gemara in Kuf Yudam Beis that says, "Kol adar b'chutz la'aretz k'misha ein lo yalakah." Anyone who lives in Chutz La'aretz is like he has no God, or according to a different girsa, it's like someone who does avodah zarah. So basically, what the Rabbi is going to say, just say it outside first. He's going to say that that's because when you're in Chutz La'aretz and you're working for the goyim, it's like you're working for their getchkas, because the pshat is that there's a pasuk in the Torah, "Va'avadtem sham Elohim acherim," right? When you go to Galus, you're going to worship other gods. So the Torah is not saying you're going to do it. It's saying that you're going to not worship, but you're going to work for them. Let's say you work for a guy, and the guy uses his money for avodah zarah, so it's like you're doing avodah zarah. Ki'ilu.
And if somebody owns his own business?
I guess not.
Uh-huh.
Maybe paying taxes.
Oh, I see.
Most countries until nowadays were religious. The countries had an official religion and everything. So if you're giving tax to their country, and a lot of times the church made Jews pay tax to it, so basically you're supporting them, even though you're not doing avodah zarah. It's ki'ilu you're doing avodah zarah. So he says basically Bizman Hazeh that Eretz Yisrael is biyad goyim. So even if you're in Eretz Yisrael, you're also doing that. So basically, there's no difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. So this whole memra that the Chazal say that you live in Chutz La'aretz is like you're doing avodah zarah is not negei Bizman Hazeh. So basically, he's going to say that's the chiluk. So let's see it inside now. He says, "Aval davar pashut v'ro'isi lahaktim tchila masha hevesi la'el divrei harif the Ein Yaakov." The Rif is Rabbi Yoshia Pinto, the Achron, the Mefarish on Ein Yaakov. He says, "The masha amru hadar b'chutz la'aretz ki'ilu oived avodah zarah eino ela b'yotzei me'eretz Yisrael midaitoi u'virtzainai." That the Rif has a question. The Rabbi Yehuda said you're not allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael. And here the Chazal are saying in the same page that if you live in Chutz La'aretz, it's like you have no God. So what's going on here? So he says it depends whether you're going out on purpose or you're going out by being forced by your enemies. He says that the Jews in Babel, they got there by force, right? They got there by the Romans, the Babylonians. So therefore they don't have this din of Kamisha Ein Lo Yalakah. Mashenka, a person who decides to leave Eretz Yisrael is Kamisha Ein Lo Yalakah. Yeah? That's the Rif's teretz, but the Rebbe is not going to agree with this. And he says, Ve'eno move on. It's not understandable. Shaharei, Chachamenu zal lamdu zeh midavid HaMelech olav hashalom. They learned this out from David HaMelech. She'amar ki gershuni hayoim mi'istapech b'nachlas Hashem le'mor leich avoid Elohim acherim. Right? David HaMelech was forced by Shaul to go into the land of the Plishtim, and he said, you forced me out of Eretz Yisrael to go serve other gods. So, David didn't go on his own. He was afraid of getting killed. They expelled me. So how could the Rif say that this member is only said when you go out on purpose, on your own? He says, even though David went against his will, still the member applies. It doesn't say davka you go out of Eretz Yisrael. It says hadar b'chutzlaretz. Anyone who lives in chutzlaretz is kamisha ein lo elokah. It doesn't say anything about going out. The main point is missing. He says, he says that there is a chiluk between people living in chutzlaretz going and people who go from Eretz Yisrael to chutzlaretz. There is such a musik. The Rif is not totally off. There is such a musik. But it's not shot in this memra of Kamisha Ein Le'alakah. That's what he's going to say. He says, Higam B'Ritva Yuma Daf Lamed Ches. The Ritva and Yuma speaks this out because he says there's a kasha there that, how are you allowed to live in Egypt? That the Torah says it's also to live in Egypt. So how were Yidden, like the Rambam and others, allowed to live in Egypt? So the Ritva goes on that kasha there in Yuma. And Vehevi, he says, he says, how could many Gedolim live in Mitzrayim? Vehevi al zeh terutzim shekos kushari Rishonim zal. He brings the other Rishonim terutzim. Aval hu masik she'anoch and yoiser she'eno iser ahu ela bizman she'Yisrael shuri malad masam. That iser only applies during the Beis Hamikdash times when you didn't live in Eretz Yisrael. Then it was also to go to Egypt. Nowadays that we have a gzeir on us to live in all parts of the earth, nowadays there's no ister to go to Egypt. Everywhere is the same. Here's clearly what the Rebbe is trying to bring out, this line. He says that there's only an ister to go out if you're one of the, B'nai Eretz Yisrael. You're living in Eretz Yisrael, there's an ister to go out to Chutz La'aretz. But there's no ister to live in Chutz La'aretz. We see this chiluk, and by the way, Rashi and Gittin, Daf Ayin Zayin, I think, says the same thing. He says, She'aser livnei Eretz Yisrael. The Gemara says a story that there was a person that goes, there was the Amoraim from Babel came to Eretz Yisrael to learn, and they went back, and someone went along with them. One of the Amoraim from Eretz Yisrael went along, and they used to stop by Akoi, and then the Bnei Eretz Yisrael would go back, and the Bnei Babel would continue on their way. So Rashi explains because it was also for a Bnei Eretz Yisrael to go out of Eretz Yisrael, but not for the Bnei Babel. Okay. So the Ritva and this Rashi say the same thing. It's not mentioned that that's the reason, because of Kol Adar B'Chutzlaretz. That's not shot in that memra. It's just a fact that the Isser is only said for Bnei Eretz Yisrael. He means other members of Chazal that talk about going out. It says, Ein yotzim Eretz Yisrael Chutz La'aretz. Unless it's a certain amount of poverty, then you're allowed to go out. Otherwise, you're not allowed to. That kind of memra is what he's talking about. And those we could explain are only talking about going out on purpose, with your own volition. But this memra in Ksuvas Kuf Yud that they learned from David Shalmer Ki Gershuni Ayoim, that they kicked me out. They can't learn that in Pshat and David, because David, in his time, there was no din that Yidden had to be scattered around the world. They had to be in Eretz Yisrael. We made David the Shalosh. That's when the din was true, that you're that you were forced to. So he's basically saying that in the time of David HaMelech, in the time when we didn't live in Eretz Yisrael, there was a din that anybody who's out of Eretz Yisrael, even if he's kicked out, is Ke'ilu Oved Avodah Zarah. And he's going to say in the next Siman because basically because you're serving them, you're helping them, you're paying taxes to them, so it's Ke'ilu you're supporting their Avodah Zarah. But right, but that's the pshat in that memra. But it's even when you're forced to go out, right? Because David HaMelech was forced. Mashen can be zman hazeh, that there's no difference between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz, so the memra wouldn't apply. And that's, I think, how he's going to explain the difference between the mitzvah gedolah and mitzvah ketana. Okay? Good?
Yes.
Okay.